The largest concrete dome on the planet wasn't built in the 20th century or even the 19th. It was poured almost 2,000 years ago in the center of Rome without rebar, steel frames, or computer calculations. It still stands today, and no modern engineer can clearly explain why it hasn't collapsed. Today, we will travel to 7 points on the map where ancient builders created things that, according to all laws of physics and common sense, shouldn't have existed in their era. Each of these objects poses the same uncomfortable question. What exactly did our ancestors know that we don't? 1. The Pantheon. Rome. Let's start with that very dome. The Pantheon in Rome was built under Emperor Hadrian around 125 AD. Its dome has a diameter of 43.3 meters, and it is still the largest unreinforced concrete dome in the world. For comparison, the dome of St. Peter's Basilica, built 1,500 years later, is smaller and had to be reinforced with chains to keep it from splitting apart. The Romans managed without chains because they used a technique that modern engineers only figured out in the 20th century. The concrete at the base of the dome is mixed with heavy tuff and travertine, but closer to the top, builders switched to pumice, a volcanic rock that weighs 3 times less than normal stone. The dome becomes lighter as it rises. And this mass distribution isn't an accident. It's a precise engineering calculation. At the very top gapes the oculus, a circular opening almost 9 meters in diameter, open to the sky. When it rains, water gets inside, but it doesn't pool, because the Pantheon's floor has a barely noticeable slope leading to 22 hidden drainage holes. The building operates as a single mechanism where every detail solves a specific task. In 2023, a team of engineers from MIT analyzed Roman concrete and found lime clasts, which were previously thought to be a mixing defect. It turned out that when these particles contact water, they trigger a chemical reaction that fills in microcracks. The Pantheon's concrete can heal itself, and the Romans intentionally included this capability in the recipe. We only discovered this mechanism using an electron microscope, yet they used it 2,000 years ago. Renaissance architects came here with ropes and plumb bobs, trying to unravel the secret. Filippo Brunelleschi spent several years in the Pantheon before daring to build the dome of the Florence Cathedral, and he still made it smaller. Michelangelo, looking at the Pantheon, said it was the work of angels, not men. 2. Palace of Knossos, Crete. If it already surprises you that the Romans beat future engineers by a millennium and a half, here is what is even more shocking. 1,000 years before Rome, on the island of Crete, there was a civilization with running water, a sewage system, and ventilation. The Palace of Knossos was excavated in 1900 by British archaeologist Arthur Evans. He expected to find the ruins of a primitive fortress, but instead discovered a complex covering over 20,000 square meters with 1,300 rooms. Beneath the floors of the palace ran an extensive network of terracotta pipes that delivered clean water from mountain springs while simultaneously draining wastewater. The pipes were conical, tapering at one end to fit into each other, creating pressure in the system. This is a principle that was only formalized in hydraulics in the 19th century. The Minoans used it 1,500 years before the Romans started building their famous aqueducts. When Evans first saw this system, he refused to believe it dated back to the 2nd millennium BC. He wrote in his diary that he was looking at engineering worthy of Victorian England, hidden beneath the ruins of the Bronze Age. In the western wing of the palace, Evans found a room he called the Queen's Megaron, featuring a toilet with a flushing mechanism. Water flowed from above, washing waste into a stone trough that emptied into an underground sewer. Europe would only return to this level of sanitation in the 19th century, following a cholera epidemic. but the palace amazes not just with its engineering, but with the scale of its thought. Light wells for ventilation, multi-level staircases, halls with columns tapering downwards to create the optical illusion of greater space. Why do you think a civilization capable of this completely vanished from history for 3,000 years? Write your opinion in the comments, because historians still don't have a single answer. 3. Mortuary Temple of Hatshepsut, Egypt. If the Minoans were ahead of their time in engineering, the next object was ahead of its time in aesthetics. The mortuary temple of Queen Hatshepsut at Deir el-Bahari on the west bank of the Nile looks like it was designed in the 1930s. 3 terraces cut into a sheer cliff, connected by ramps with colonnades of strict, rectangular columns without a single swirl. No other Egyptian temple looks like this because the architect Senenmut created something fundamentally new. He didn't just place a building next to a cliff. He made the cliff part of the building. The temple's geometry perfectly mirrors the lines of the mountain range behind it, as if the architecture grows straight out of the earth. This technique, integrating a building into the landscape, became the core idea of 20th century architectural modernism. Frank Lloyd Wright became famous for this approach when he built Falling Water in 1935, but Senenmut applied the exact same principle 3,500 years before him. The temple is oriented so that on the winter solstice, a ray of sunlight penetrates through all 3 levels and illuminates the statue of the god Amun in the furthest sanctuary. This means the builders calculated the angle of the building's axis with astronomical precision, without telescopes and without computers. Hatshepsut herself was one of the few female pharaohs. Her stepson, Thutmose III, ordered all mentions of her destroyed after her death. Workers chiseled her name off steles and erased her face from reliefs, but they didn't touch the temple itself because destroying it would mean destroying the mountain. The building, conceived as a monument to one woman, survived all attempts to erase her from history and has stood for 3.5 millennia. 4. Petra, Jordan. If carving a building into a mountain seems difficult, the next master builders went even further. They carved an entire city out of a vertical cliff, starting from the top. Petra, in modern-day Jordan, was the capital of the Nabatean kingdom and a major trading hub of the ancient world. Its most famous facade, Al-Khazne, the treasury, is carved from solid pink sandstone and reaches 40 meters high. To grasp the complexity of this work, you have to understand the method. The builders started at the top of the cliff and worked their way down. A mistake on the upper tier would mean abandoning the entire structure because you can't put the stone back. They didn't have scaffolding in the traditional sense. They carved steps directly into the rock and climbed down them, creating the facade centimeter by centimeter. The columns of Al-Khazne are in the Corinthian style, with detailing that is hard to replicate even with modern milling machines. The Nabateans didn't just copy Greek architecture. They blended it with Egyptian and Mesopotamian motifs, creating a style that exists nowhere else in the world. The city had over 800 rock-cut tombs, temples, and dwellings, and to this day, less than 15% of the territory has been excavated. If you're new to this channel, hit subscribe so you don't miss the moment archaeologists uncover the remaining 85% of Petra and what's hidden inside. The Nabateans carved stone from the top down, but their hydro-engineering deserves its own discussion. In a desert where it rains only a few times a year, they built a city for 100,000 people with fountains and pools. A system of channels, cisterns, and ceramic pipes collected every drop of water over hundreds of square kilometers and funneled it into the city. The Nabateans found a way to coat the inside of stone reservoirs with waterproof plaster, the recipe for which has never been fully recovered. When Rome annexed the Nabatean kingdom in 106 AD, Roman engineers, who considered themselves the best in the world, were blown away by the level of Nabatean water management. They didn't rebuild it, they just kept using it, which in itself is the highest form of professional recognition. 5. Chand Baori, India. Now let's transport ourselves to the other side of the world, to Rajasthan, India, where in the 9th century a structure was built that leaves modern architects breathless. The Chand Baori stepwell plunges 13 stories down and contains 3,500 steps, arranged in a perfectly symmetrical geometric pattern. Looking from above, the walls of the well look like an optical illusion, like a 3D software render rather than 9th century stonemasonry. Each of the 4 walls descends to the water via zigzagging staircases, and every step is fitted to the next with a precision that rules out chance. The well was built by order of King Chanda of the Nikumba dynasty between 800 and 900 AD. The official story is simple. The arid climate required deep access to groundwater. But if the goal was just water, why this insane complexity? A simple shaft with a rope and a bucket would have done the job, yet here we have 3,500 steps laid with mathematical precision. Some historians believe that Chand Baori wasn't just a well, but a temple complex, a place for meditation where the descent to the water symbolized the path to enlightenment. The temperature at the bottom of the well is 5 to 6 degrees lower than at the surface, acting as a natural air conditioner in scorching Rajasthan. People went down not just for water, but for the cool air, turning the well into a center of social life. On one side of the well, unlike the other 3, there are no stairs. Instead, a gallery with niches, pavilions, and sculptures was built. There was a temple dedicated to Harshat Mata, the goddess of joy, confirming that Chand Baori was intended from the very beginning to be more than a water source. The architect designed a space where the daily necessity of going down for water turned into a ritual, and a utilitarian structure became a work of art. What baffles engineers is the stability of the structure. 13 stories in soft limestone without a single crack in 1,000 years. What architectural object in your country or city seems inexplicably complex for its time? Let me know below. 6. Baalbek, Lebanon. From India, we move to Lebanon, where there are stones that shouldn't be where they are. Baalbek, also known as Heliopolis, an ancient city in the Bekaa Valley, holds something that even modern heavy machinery bows to. The Temple of Jupiter in Baalbek stands on a platform of stone blocks, 3 of which are known as the trilithon. Each block of the trilithon weighs about 800 tons and is approximately 21 meters long. They are raised to a height of 7 meters and stacked on top of each other with millimeter precision, without mortar, without gaps. To understand the scale, 800 tons is roughly the weight of 2 fully loaded Boeing 747 passenger jets. Modern cranes capable of lifting such weight do exist, but they are rare and require months of site preparation. In a quarry near Baalbek, another block still lies, the so-called Stone of the South, weighing about 1,200 tons. They started carving it from the bedrock, but abandoned it for an unknown reason. In 2014, the German Archaeological Institute found another block nearby, named the Stone of the Pregnant Woman, weighing around 1,650 tons. This is the heaviest worked stone ever found on the planet, and it lies in the quarry as if it was put off for later, and they never came back for it. Official science suggests the blocks were moved on wooden rollers by thousands of workers, but calculations show that moving an 800-ton block on a flat surface requires the pulling force of at least 40,000 people pulling simultaneously. The problem is there simply isn't enough space around the stone for 40,000 people and their ropes. French archaeologist Michel Alouf, who worked in Baalbek in the early 20th century, noted that locals had for centuries called the platform the work of jinn, believing humans were incapable of such a feat. Textbooks explain Baalbek with patience and slave labor, but no experiment has yet replicated moving a block of that weight to that height using ancient technologies. There's no room for mysticism here. There's only room for one honest admission. We don't know exactly how it was done. 7. Lalibela, Ethiopia. The final point of our journey is in Ethiopia, and it might be the most mysterious of all. The small town of Lalibela in the north of the country holds 11 monolithic churches carved from solid rock in the 12th and 13th centuries. These churches weren't built. They were carved. Builders started by selecting a patch of bedrock and carving a deep trench around it, leaving a solid block of stone in the middle. Then, from top to bottom, they carved buildings out of this block with walls, windows, columns, and interior halls. The Church of St. George is carved in the shape of an equilateral cross and goes 12 meters into the ground. If you stand on the edge of the trench and look down, you see a building with perfectly straight walls cut from volcanic tuff, sitting in a rectangular pit, like a ship in a dry dock. All 11 churches are connected by underground tunnels and passages, forming a labyrinth where it's easy to get lost. A drainage system diverts rainwater from the walls, preventing it from eroding the stone. The orientation of the buildings takes into account the cardinal directions and the flow of water. According to Ethiopian tradition, King Lalibela ordered the construction of a new Jerusalem after Muslims captured the real Jerusalem in 1187. Legend says the construction took 23 years, and that angels helped the workers at night, doing double the quota. If we put aside the angels and calculate the volume of rock that had to be excavated, the numbers are terrifying. For St. George alone, about 500 cubic meters of rock had to be removed. For all 11 churches with tunnels and trenches, the count runs into tens of thousands of cubic meters. Without steel tools, without explosives, without machinery. Portuguese monk Francisco Alvarez, who reached Lalibela in 1521, wrote in his notes that no one would believe him when he described what he saw. He was right. In Europe, his report was dismissed as fiction, and Lalibela remained practically unknown to the Western world for another 400 years. Even today, while the temples are a UNESCO World Heritage Site, most people outside of Africa have never heard of them. Bieta Georgis stands in its stone pit today, and the rain runs down its walls exactly as intended 800 years ago. Every Sunday, priests in white robes descend the narrow steps carved into the rock and hold services in the same halls for which these churches were created. Lalibela didn't become a museum. It remained a living temple, and that might be the greatest miracle. We have journeyed through 7 points on the map, separated by thousands of kilometers and millennia. Roman concrete, Minoan plumbing, Egyptian landscape integration, Nabatean rock carving, Indian depth geometry, Lebanese logistics of the impossible, and Ethiopian subtractive architecture. Not a single one of these technologies was passed on to the next civilization. Every time knowledge was born, reached perfection, and died along with the culture that spawned it. The recipe for Roman concrete was lost after the fall of the empire and hasn't been fully recovered to this day. Minoan hydraulics disappeared with a volcanic eruption on Santorini. Nabatean rock carving mastery ended when trade routes shifted and Petra emptied. We are used to thinking that progress is a straight line, from simple to complex, from caves to skyscrapers. These 7 places prove that the line of progress has always been jagged, with peaks we still can't replicate and valleys that lasted centuries. Perhaps the main mistake of textbooks isn't that they lie, but that they draw a smooth road where in reality there was a mountain trail with cliffs. And if knowledge truly dies with civilizations, then each of these 7 places is not just a tourist attraction, but a warning. A warning that even the most perfect technology is useless if there's no one to pass it on to the next generation. What year were you born, and what country are you watching from? Write it in the comments. I'm curious where the people who watch until the very end come from. We don't know what knowledge we will lose tomorrow, and how many centuries it will take to discover it again. But one thing is certain: anyone who laughs at our primitive ancestors today has simply never stood under the dome of the Pantheon or touched the walls of Lalibela.